Welcome everyone. I'm Gopika. As Kevin mentioned, I'm a third year MD-PhD student at the Medical College of Wisconsin. So third year basically means that I'm in the blue first box here. So I'm done with 2 years of medical school, and then I took my step one exam. So you might be familiar with the USMLE step process. We have step one, step two that we take during medical school, and then step three is something we do during our residency. So I'm done with step one, and then I'm almost done with my third year as well. So this is the general program overview at most MD-PhD schools. However, there are some programs where they have maybe 1 year of medical school research and then 3 years of rotations, or a year and a half of the basic science medical
Sorry for
school.
interrupting you. I think your screen is not like the slides are not shared into the viewer mode. Like it's not
Oh,
moving.
really?
Yeah.
Hold on. How about now?
Not for me. What about other
Okay,
folks?
let me try again. Okay, how about now?
Yep.
So you can see the slides advancing?
Yep.
Okay, beautiful. But this is the general structure of most MD-PhD programs. Usually the PhD part is inbuilt in the middle. So if you have any questions about general structures and things like that, I would highly recommend looking at the program's websites. They normally have a map that looks like this with inbuilt curriculum. And that can definitely be one of your deciding factors on where you want to go to school as well. So make sure you check out the MD-PhD curriculum too. But in general, the MD-PhD training is supposed to create individuals who help bridge the medical clinical side of things as well as the biomedical research. So we're kind of that in-between people who have a little bit of expertise in both, and hopefully we're able to translate more of our basic science research into clinics. So that's the general role that we play. After graduating, you have a variety of options for residencies. So there are some residencies that are called physician scientist training programs, which are geared specifically towards people who have an interest in research. So a lot of the people that apply to those programs are MD, PhD graduates, with maybe a few exceptions that have a lot of research experience. So if you want to keep doing research in residency, there's specific paths for us. But at the same time, if you don't want to do a research specific residency for whatever reason, we are just as qualified and able to apply to all residencies. So just keep in mind that we can kind of do both. Okay. So this is the general application overview of what you need to think about when you're considering applying to MD PhDs. So the main components that are different from applying to medical school. So when you apply to medical school, we have a personal statement that we write. But for MD PhD, there are 2 additional essays, the Why MD PhD essay and the Significant Research Experience essay. And I'll actually probably be spending a good amount of time today talking about those and giving you some feedback on that. Because now that I'm a third year student, I help interview for the MD PhD program. Most schools have 1 faculty interviewer and 1 student interviewer. So I'm usually one of the student interviewers present. And I think being on this side, one of the things we really care about are these 2 essays and seeing if you're able to convey your passion for MD PhD and if you're able to convey that you've had significant research and this is an informed decision that you're doing. And then of course the MCAT and GPA and are important as well. But one caveat is I know MSAR has like an average MCAT potentially for each school. MD PhD programs do tend to look outside of that. So let's say an average MCAT of a school is 518. Just because you have a 516 or a 512, it doesn't mean you can't apply to that program, because if you have really good research experiences, we will consider that. So the scores are a little more fluid as long as your research experiences and publications can make up for that. So don't completely depend on the MSAR for the MCAT GPA part for MD PhD specifically. I'll talk a little bit about experiences and how I kind of broke down my research specific experiences versus other experiences. And we'll go through a little bit about the letter of recommendations as well. So as I go through the rest of it, please feel free to just pause, unmute, and ask questions. I don't want this to be where I'm speaking at you. I want to be able to clarify questions or give you feedback. So if you have even like personal questions about, oh, I think this is that good, I'm happy to answer those. So just unmute. So the first part I really wanted to emphasize was the letter of recommendation part. Letter of recommendations are really, really important in the MD-PhD selection process. especially the ones that you get from your research mentors. And please get a letter of recommendation from every single research mentor. We almost sometimes look at it as a red flag if for some reason you did research with someone and you talk about it, but then you don't have a letter of recommendation from them. So if for some reason you're not able to solicit a letter, either be able to explain that in your application somewhere, or consider maybe not including that research if it's not as significant. But one of the things in MD-PhD that's really important is including a research letter from every single one of your research mentors. In general, medical students probably upload about 5 or 6 letter of recommendations. You do have the option of uploading up to 10, and you can pick which letters go to which school. So just because you have 10 letters online doesn't mean you have to send all 10 to every school. So, if there's a school where their focus is really on community engagement and you have a letter that really speaks to that side of you, definitely send that letter to them. But if there's a school where they have a really strong biomedical engineering, for instance, that was my undergrad, if they have a biomedical engineering PhD program and you're interested, feel free to submit an additional letter from your engineering professor supporting your expertise in it just to that school, because that letter probably doesn't matter elsewhere, but it would to that school. So you can always add some additional letters that might help for 1 or 2 schools, but not everything else. And the other thing is ask early. You want these letters from your research mentors to be detailed. You don't want cookie cutter letters. You want them to talk about what you did at the lab, what you accomplished, what you overcame. You want to give them time to write a really good letter. And in that email, don't be shy of saying, do you feel comfortable writing me a strong letter of recommendation in support of my application? Worst case, they'll say, hey, I'm not sure I know you enough, or I'm not sure I feel comfortable enough to give you the best recommendation letter, and that's okay. You'd much rather have them tell you that rather than you somehow figuring out that they submitted a subpar letter of recommendation. So use that word. Can you write me a strong letter of recommendation? And the other thing that's always helpful is to include in your email, include a good resume, and use your mentors on F1 Doctors to really have a crisp, nice put together resume, and send that to them and say, hey, please find attached my resume, and then offer to give them either a list of some of your more meaningful interactions or experiences with them. Professors get really busy. Sometimes their letters are cookie cutter, not because they don't like you, but because they're just that busy. So offer to write that. And if a professor says, can you just send me a draft of the letter and I'll make edits? Write the best letter you can think of. I know it feels uncool. I know it feels cringy to be bragging about yourself, but just write the most glorifying letter you can and send it to them. And more often than not, they'll just sign it because they don't have the time. So do yourself a favor. Don't hold back. Don't be shy. And one of the things in medicine, as you get into medical school, you'll get that response more and more. So as you say, hey, doc, can I get a letter of recommendation? They'll say, write it, I'll sign it. So it's okay if they tell you that. Get used to that feeling. It'll serve you well in medical school. So the other part I wanted to touch base on, and questions that I get a lot from my mentees on F1 Doctors, is how I selected schools. So the first thing that I personally did was I did go on MSAR and narrow down schools based on the MCAT score, but not so if, I'm going to show you my scores later anyway, so I don't mind sharing, but I got a 518 on the MCAT. So instead of just looking at, if it's 518, I'm going to look at average range of 516 to 520. I said, I'm going to look at an average range of, 514 to the highest level possible, because for MD-PhD programs, your scores don't totally matter to the same extent to MD programs. Another thing you want to keep in mind is if you score like a 518, 520, and you apply to schools that have an average MCAT range of 502, 503, don't be surprised if they don't give you an interview. A lot of times, in undergrad, we always talk about safety schools, but that concept doesn't totally translate in medical schools. You can be quote unquote too good for a school because they can only do so many interviews. And sometimes if they're like, this person has a high enough MCAT that they're likely going to end up elsewhere, they might just not even give you that interview. So if you're going to apply to a school with a much lower standard deviation away from your score, write them a really good secondary talking about why you want to go to that school, what connection you have to that school, what really motivates you to go there, and really share that with them. And that also goes the other way, right? So if a school's way out of your range, but then there's a professor there who just is the one person you really need to work with, you also don't need to get them off of your list. Just make sure in your secondary application, you can really convey why you want to go to that specific school and how you will add to their community. So the MCAT score range gets a little iffy when we come to MD-PhD. The other thing that is an additional step that we have to do is call or email the schools that you're interested in applying to and ask if they have funding for international students that year, and especially international students outside of Canada. Unless you're from Canada, there might be more schools that are within that take applications from Canadians, but if you're a international student outside of Canada, there's more limitations on funding opportunities. So before submitting an application, I would personally call and email and get a confirmation from them that they do have spots for you. And another caveat and an interesting response you'll get sometimes is, hey, I'm an international student. I'm very interested in your program. I just wanted to check in and see if you have funding for international students this year. I know in your FAQ, so also look at, if you go to their school's website, look at the frequently asked questions. A lot of times that's where they talk about whether they take international students. So that's one way of starting to screen online. You can say, oh, it says you accept international students, but I just want to confirm, are there any differences in how my application will be considered in respect to non-international students? Some schools will reply in a very kind of nicely worded way of saying, we accept and will review all applications. And we are looking for exceptional candidates if you're an international student, or they'll kind of make it somehow not just like oh yeah, we see everyone equally. Like if they don't make it very explicit that yes, we'll consider your application, we'll consider to the same extent as others, just know that you can still apply to them if they accept your application. But unless you really stand out amongst the bunch, don't get discouraged if you don't get an interview, or after an interview if you don't get accepted. So still take your shot, definitely submit that application if you can afford the number of applications. But just know that even some schools that say, yes, we take international students for MD-PhD, they kind of, this is my funny thing, I'm like, if you're not a Nobel Prize winner, but unless you're like a really, really standoutish candidate, they might not. And just don't let that discourage you. Don't let that influence how you feel about yourself. That's kind of just the reality of it. When I applied, I think I applied to about 11 or 12 schools. Out of that, 2 responded and said, hey, I'm sorry, we're going to have to rescind your application because we no longer take international students this year. We don't have the funding for it. So I think I had about 9 left that hopefully actually reviewed my applications. And then I went to 3 MD-PhD interviews. So on top of that, I did apply to, and I got accepted to all 3. So I was debating between those 3 for MD-PhD. I did apply to MD programs. So with being an international student, I would really recommend having a backup plan. My backup was to apply to an MD program and then maybe through my first year, apply into the MD-PhD program. A lot of schools do allow that, by the way. So just because you get into an MD program and not the MD-PhD doesn't mean this route is off limits. You can still apply MD-PhD. And I also had a master's in biomedical engineering position at UW-Madison. So those were kind of my backups that I had squared away. So I also went to MD interviews as well. But as soon as I got accepted into my first MD-PhD program, I withdrew my application from all the MD programs. So you can decide if you want to continue spending the money to go interview. But if you're like, hey, I'm going to pick this over any MD program anyway, you can save money on interviewing. That's just a personal decision. So I'm going to dive into the AMCAS, and I actually have some screenshots from my AMCAS application. So I probably should have mentioned this. If it says confidential in the top right corner, please don't screenshot or please don't share any of this. If it does not say confidential and you find any of the information useful, please feel free to screenshot that and use that. So as long as it doesn't say confidential, if you want to take a screenshot of it, go ham. So this is one of the other questions we get a lot is from students who might have gone to high school here. Do AP classes count as pre-med classes, right? So when I entered UW-Madison, my AP classes counted for my graduation from UW-Madison, but when I entered it into transcripts, this is the grade that AMCAS shows. So schools actually don't see grades, and this is also university specific. And I didn't know this until the end, but I also made sure all my pre-med credits were covered anyway. So if you go on university websites, they'll tell you you need 2 biology classes, you need 1 physics, you need 1 chemistry. Like they'll tell you what the pre-med requirements are. Make sure you cover them. And you don't want to end up in the end where you come back and you don't have a grade from those if you try to cover them with AP classes. So another opportunity for you is to check with your school to see how they'll show up on your transcript. If it's not going to show a grade, you need to take that class during your pre-med years to make up for that requirement. So make sure you cover all your pre-med requirements. And then this is kind of what the rest of your grades will go into as. And then the main thing that you want to keep in mind is the course names. Make sure you enter them. And then in the course type, I can't see it directly on here, but when you have to manually take a copy of your transcript and enter it. And it tells you categories. Oh, this is a science course. This is a biology course. This is it's right here. Course class. This is an engineering course. And the reason that matters is at the end you get, I'll talk about this real quick, but at the end you get your GPA summaries that it automatically calculates on the AMCAS application, and it gives you your all biology, chemistry, physics, math GPA and your average GPA. So when we're looking at candidates, let's say someone did like I don't know, a really difficult chemical engineering or civil engineering major. So their overall average GPA is a 3.75, but then this particular GPA is like a 3.9. We still will view that favorably. So, I would make sure that you maintain a good BCPM GPA throughout your entire undergrad, because we might be a little more forgiving of the average GPA with respect to what the school normally takes, but the one that we really care about and one that probably is more predictive of how you'll do in medical school is your BCPM GPA. And the other thing that I wanted to share, I'm gonna go back, okay. So some schools have interesting requirements. Like I think this was Pittsburgh that said we had to take an additional advanced English class as part of your pre-med. As an engineering major, I did not have any advanced engineering courses. Me taking biology counted as English for us. So make sure that if you haven't taken a class that is a requirement for a program that you're applying to, you at least list it in your planned future coursework. So these are all like current and future coursework. So this is after you submit your application, especially if you are planning on going straight through and aren't taking a gap year, you still have that final year. So it's a little bit cheating where I listed that I would take an English course in my second semester of my senior year. But then when I knew I wasn't going to go to that university anyway, I just didn't bother taking that class. But make sure you put it in your plans that you're going to take it. And then there's also an additional box that they have that says explain any pre-med coursework missing and things like that. So you want to explain to them that you have intentions of taking the class to meet their requirements. So don't miss out on an interview because you didn't meet all their pre-med requirements. Make sure you meet all the class requirements. Your MCAT scores, that's pretty standard. Okay, so I think, so here's the part that I'll be spending the majority of the rest of our time on. And I was hoping I'd kind of walk you through how I approached actually writing my application and conveying to them why they should take me at their university. But before I start that, do you guys have any pressing questions about anything I've said so far, logistics, anything like that? Yes, Sai.
So like you were saying, I'm going to be applying to both MD and MD-PhD programs just as a backup.
Yep.
But in my letters of recommendation, should I like mention to my PIs that, like please say physician scientist or just the lab, but do not say MD-PhD programs because that might get them off or whatever, like just not like MD programs might not like it.
Yeah, that's actually a really good question. So I'm sorry I forgot to mention that before, but if you're getting letters from, let's say, like my research mentor was an MD-PhD and I wanted him to write me a letter that I could send to MD programs and a letter that I could send to MD-PhD. And I specifically said, could you please write me 2 different letters, one geared towards the MD program where you talk more about shadowing and also the research, and then a second letter where he really elaborates on the research part. So it's okay to talk to a few of your mentors that are really key letter writers to say, could you please write 2 separate letters? And in the MD letter, you actually don't want to mention that you're applying to MD-PhD programs, because MD schools know that if you are accepted into an MD-PhD program, chances are you're not going to take the MD only program. So they don't want to waste an admission spot on you. So you want to be really cautious about making sure that they label it as such. And when you send them an invitation at AMCAS, they're actually able to, I think when you generate it, you're able to label it as something. So you can send them a first email, label it as MD only on your end, have them upload it, send them a second email, label it MD-PhD on your end, and have them upload it, and then assign it to your schools accordingly. So you do have the option to do that.
But you did that because your mentor was an MD-PhD, right? Because you
I did that.
You did shadowing and research.
Yes, but I also wanted him to talk about me as a person, me as a team player, how I operated in the research field, what he thought of me as a scientist. So he did talk extensively about my research as well, but he just focused more on my shadowing in the other one. But even if it wasn't for the shadowing part, I still would have wanted a letter from him because he probably knew me best in the biomedical field.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. And even in MD programs, they look highly upon people that can do research, right? So even in medical school, medical students do a lot of research, and it's really a benefit to have students who already know how to do research, because it's easier for medical doctors to start working with that student and do research. So research is always beneficial for you. You just want to make sure that the application says the student is really good at, hypothesis-driven testing and is really good at research, and will be able to translate that to clinical research when they talk about the MD part. Versus in the MD-PhD letter, they'll say the student is really good at this. I can really picture the student growing into an independent researcher. That's what your physician scientist letter should say. So it's about how you take those experiences that they share and then frame it into what they see you doing in the future. So that's what should differ between those letters. Awesome. Any other questions? Awkward 7-second waiting. Okay, I'll go on. So for the rest of it, I was hoping to kind of tell you how I framed my story. And I think when you start writing your application, it's a good exercise to put down something like this on paper. So when I started med school, I actually didn't know that, or not med school, when I started undergrad, I actually didn't know for sure that I was going to apply to medical school. And I didn't know for sure, or I didn't even know what MD-PhD was. So I did know I was going to apply to that. So all of my experiences in undergrad were very biomedical engineering focused. I did a lot of product design work. I competed in innovation competitions. So I was very much grooming to become a product design engineer. I stumbled upon like a research program my first year and happened to really like it. And then I joined the lab where I gained the MD-PhD mentors lab my second year, almost kind of just hoping to continue what I liked about research, but never really planning for sure, being like, oh, I think I want to do research in my life. Nothing like that. I just was like, I like doing this. I'll just keep doing it. But it was after working with him and kind of shadowing patients, seeing some of his clinical trial work and seeing his lab work, that I got really excited about potentially having that career for myself. And it was not until third year that I was like, you know what, I'm going to apply MD-PhD. So my decision to apply MD-PhD was pretty late. And I will say, having been on this side and seeing other applications, if I had to apply now, I'd probably do things a little differently. So as I go through my application, I'll also tell you what I would do differently, and hopefully you can learn from my experience that way too. So the first story, or my general story that I kind of thought of when I was putting down, who am I and why should they take me, was first, the biggest component of everything about me from a professional standpoint was that I was a biomedical engineering, and I had a lot of expertise in product design. I had a lot of expertise in kind of new product development. So I could do SolidWorks, I could do 3D printing, I could do laser cutting. So I had a lot more experiences and expertise that were kind of unique in that sense. And I really enjoyed my research lab experience, right? So that was a component that was an important part of my story. And the main thing about engineering that I extracted from those experiences is that what I really loved about everything in engineering was how creative it was, how much you could solve real world problems. And I really loved learning about the human body, right? So in biomedical engineering, we learn, instead of like levers, we learn the mechanics of how your arm works. Instead of, oh, the force of a car driving, you learn the force of walking, right? So I really enjoyed the human body component of it. So that was my main, why from biomedical engineering am I going into medicine, extraction of what I loved most about my past. And then the third component that tied it all in was I loved my clinical shadowing and volunteering experiences in the hospital. And that's really what motivated me to want to integrate more patient care into my future career. And I also had felt like that my skills and my strengths are suited for patient care. So those are kind of the three big things that I extracted from all of my experiences that I worked on. And I said, in my personal statement, these are the three things I want to convey to them. I want to convey to them that I love research. I want to convey to them that I love problem solving and thinking critically and really understanding the nuances of the human body. And I want to convey to them that I loved working with patients and I really thought deeply about what it meant to be a doctor. And I wanted to convey to them that I am suited for this job, right? That I have the skills and the strengths to be a good doctor. So those are the things that had to go into everything that I wrote for the application. So, and then the final kind of cherry on top is I wanted to really highlight how my background would make me unique and important for them to consider me on top of maybe other candidates, right? So you always want to highlight what makes you different, what makes you unique, and really inbuild that into your application. So that was kind of what I wanted to integrate as I conveyed my story throughout. So, okay. So I will start with my significant experiences component. So I didn't want to pull out all of my experiences, all 15, but I wanted to show you out of the 2 significant research experiences, how I balanced the components of my story that I was telling you, right? So the first significant experience that I highlighted was something that would tell them about my skills in innovation and design thinking. And in the meantime, in telling that story, I wanted to convey my leadership qualities and ability to take an idea to action. So I basically talked about a club that I started in undergrad and kind of built for a couple of years. It was called Insight Wisconsin. And we basically promoted innovative thinking and we brought together projects that companies and professors had that were kind of like, it would be really cool if it worked, but they were kind of like out of the water projects or kind of out of the box projects. And then we had teams of students work on them. So it was really fostering that creative thinking. So when you look at this in my application, the first paragraph is basically the experience description, right? So I talk about, we wanted to gain more experience in developing new technology, but then our university lacked this component of it. So we started a club to promote, the things that I just told you about. And then what you really want to highlight is the success of what you did. So here I talk about how we raised money to support the organization and how many projects we've acquired and then how we've grown. And then the last sentence there is saying, what my individual role was. So I'm talking about, I could mentor teams, I led meetings, acquired projects and sponsors. And in saying this, so if I was sitting on the application side of this and reading it, I see, okay, this applicant identified that there was something missing within the environment or within their education. And so they took initiative to start something. And then I say, okay, this applicant was able to raise money. This applicant was able to, take on leadership roles within an organization and lead things and actually take something from start and grow it. So it shows initiative. And then I would say, oh, great. And the application was able to leave, the applicant was able to leave something sustainable behind at their university. So as someone that's reviewing the application, that's what I take away. But then when you're writing it, you don't want to tell them that. You want to show, not tell. So you don't want to say, oh, I'm a leader. I am a great listener. You want to tell them a story from which when the reviewer, read it, I say, wow, they're a leader. So you want to show, not tell with every single experience that you're writing. And then for the most meaningful remarks, I talked about what the club actually taught me. So I'm talking about how it taught me the engineering, leadership, teamwork, how it taught me to work through challenges, and then overcoming. So I'm talking a little bit about persevering. I'm talking a little bit about, and I put in the grant writing in there because that was more geared towards my MD-PhD application, right? So everything that I talked about had a nuance in who is my audience and what do I want them to know. And then I also next talk about how I had opportunities to speak about the events, again, catering it towards my MD-PhD applications. Because what are skills that you really need to learn in MD-PhD? How to do good research. That's just one component. The other component, how to write really well, how to present really well, how to write grants and acquire funding. Those are all key components of being a successful MD-PhD. So even though my experience is about innovation and mentoring and how that taught me stuff, I am also in the side portraying skills that are important for an MD-PhD. So as you're writing about your most meaningful remarks, you want to be honest about what you took away, why something was impactful to you, why it really was so meaningful for you, but you also want to think about your audience and maybe integrate components. So if you're like, there's 20 reasons this is really good, pick the reasons that might make you stand out really well for an MD-PhD applicant, if that makes sense. Any questions on that? Okay. And then I'll kind of move on to how I highlighted my research experiences. So one of the things I want to point out here is when I put in my, in the first box, I put down all my poster presentations and speeches together. So including my engineering presentations, my national poster presentations, everything. As you can see here, by the time I applied for MD-PhD, I had no publications back then. All my publications were, I think I had 3 that were under review and 2 of them were first author. Kevin, were you gonna say something? Okay, yeah, you're good. So in hindsight, I probably should have taken a gap here and waited for all 3 of those publications to get accepted. Because in MD-PhD, as much as I like to say we just care that you love research, we also care that you're productive in research. And especially as an international student, if you want to get that edge and say, pick me over the other easy to choose person, publications and national presentations really, really help. It doesn't mean you can't apply without it, right? So I guess I'm living proof that you can apply without it and you can be successful in getting acceptances. But if you kind of want to aim for some of the bigger MD-PhD programs, you do want to try and get well-written publications, especially in the basic science world if you can. So in hindsight, if I had to go back and do it all over again, I'd probably take another year and wait for all 3 of those publications to basically get accepted. I think it puts your application at the next tier. And then the next 2 things I wanted to highlight were, as you can see here, I put each of my PI, so this is kind of going back to your question, Sai. I listed every single one of my research experiences as separate research experiences. This was, again, knowing that I was gearing my application basically for MD-PhD. At some point when I was applying, when I submitted my application, the other thing I would change is I probably wouldn't even apply to the other MD programs because I knew if I wasn't going to get into MD-PhD, I probably would just have taken the biomedical engineering master's or the gap year and applied again. I didn't want to do just an MD program. So my entire application, I focused more on highlighting my research experience and gearing it towards that MD-PhD. And I didn't care too much if MD programs were a little suspicious about why I had so much research. I cared more about the MD-PhD. That being said, if you're equally happy in both programs, you maybe want to balance enough clinical experiences and clinical volunteering to really show them that you want to be a clinician first and research second. I basically scream research plus clinician, but MD programs might not be super thrilled about that type of an application. So kind of think about that. The main thing I wanted to highlight here, though, with each of your experiences, the main thing, I know it's only a short box, you can only say so much, but you really want to highlight what you learned and how it informed your career path. And this is also a nuance for the MD side, right? So you're saying in the first sentence, I basically talk about how I worked with a radiologist and I was doing an engineering project for a clinician, and then saying, I'm saying I saw how a clinician was able to work with engineers to fix problems that they had in patient care and improve patient care. And as a doctor, I want to do the same. And the main reason I said as a doctor, I want to do the same, or I hope to do the same, and I highlighted the patient care, is kind of, again, balancing you'll get to talk more about your research experience in your research essay. So this entire section is for your MD people. You want to woo your MD people also, because that's another caveat. A lot of MD PhD programs require that you at least get waitlisted or accepted by the MD program, and then only the MSTP program can accept you. There are some situations where the MSTP program loved you so much that they might be able to override a rejection from the MD program, but it's very uncommon. So if the MD program rejects you, you're kind of out on the MD PhD side. So make sure that in this application, you write enough about your research to appease the MD people. And then in your research essay, really show them your research acumen and everything else to please the MD PhD people. So balance out those two sides. And then again, in the bottom, I'm saying, through my experiences, I learned how to connect engineering with clinical needs and get a deeper understanding of how the technologies I will be using as a physician, right? So again, highlighting that here's how I'm going to bring this to clinics component for your research. And then the last thing is my second significant experience. I put together my most influential research, basically. So again, this was an MD PhD oriented decision where one of my significant research experiences was more of my engineering acumen, with things kind of sprinkled in there, showing them that I'll make a good MD PhD candidate. And this one is completely about how I worked with an MD PhD doctor and what that taught me, and how this project was really fulfilling and what I was able to do in the lab. This is again an MD PhD decision. You don't have to do that. That being said, if you apply MD PhD and one of your significant research or significant experiences is not research, it better be something so good that we can understand why it wasn't research, right? So like, I really did something wonderful for the community and it really, really was impactful. Absolutely. Put that as your second research significant experience. But otherwise, I think it's kind of mainstream to put your second experience as research. It's a more personal style thing. But again, if you're like, I'm an exceptional musician, I am a wonderful dancer, I have this additional amazing skill, put it as your significant research experience and then really sell your MD PhD part in the other two essays. So you can balance that out as you feel. Okay. So I kind of wanted to say, yes.
So I'm kind of confused about, so do you put your publications and poster as different, like the one where you're talking about your lab? Are those two different experiences, or like do you combine them?
So in this lab, the only thing I talk about is that, I presented at AACR and I was able to write my first research fellowship. It taught me how to present my findings and write up project proposals, right? So I'm talking about what skills I learned from here. I'm not putting in the details of my presentation. Here, it's almost like how you would put in a citations. You put in, here's the title of my talk, here's what I presented it, here's the abstract number.
Oh.
Yeah. And then same thing with your publications. You also want to put in, if you, like your title, what journal you submitted to, what date, the DOI.
Okay. So basically your three significant experiences could be like, one is publications, another one is about your lab, and then if you have like a second lab or something, you also put that. Is that kind of how, for an MD PhD, you would want your three most significant experiences to be?
I actually would not put more than one as I would put, so back when I applied, you only got two significant experiences, right? So I put down one of them as research and the other as my engineering side. If I had three, my third one would probably be my community engagement work or shadowing. And honestly, one of the things in hindsight that I maybe would have changed is, instead of putting my research experiences as significant, I probably could have gotten creative in writing more about, or putting it as significant, but also writing more about how the MD PhD really highlighted his acumen for seeing patients and how the research translated clinically and how I learned about patient care in the process. I learned more, I wrote more about research, but you have the opportunity to do that later in your research essay, or in your research essay. So I would have probably put more about the clinical side of things if I had to do it all over again.
Okay.
Yeah, because your research, you have an entire 10,000 word essay to highlight your research. So you have
That's
plenty
true,
of space
yeah.
for that. So this is, I always like to think about it this way. The experiences that you write and the personal statement that you write should highlight that you're a good researcher, but should really highlight why you'll make an excellent clinician, right? So it should talk about your empathy, your maturity, your and how good of a person you are in all other aspects. That's what should be conveyed in this. I'm just showing you how I integrated my research components, but all of my other experiences were shadowing, volunteering. I put down things that I did for the community. So that was the rest of my experiences. So other than the 5 that I'm showing you, everything else was conveying to them why I would be a good person in the medical field. And that's what you want to do. You want to sell your experiences to the medical people just as much as your MD, PhD people. Okay. And then I guess that's a nice segue into this component where this is actually a really cool diagram that AAMC posted about the holistic review process of MD, PhD, right? So we talked about the strong academics and we talked about productive research. So publications, presentations really help. And then the aspect here that I really want to highlight is the physician scientist career commitment. So when I'm reading an application, the question that's going through my head, are they going to make it through 8 years of school? So 7 to 8 years of school. Are they committed to go through that? The PhD is pretty fast tracked, right? So we get in and out in 3 to 4 years and it goes by pretty quickly. And in the middle of your PhD, you have to take a qualifying exam. So in about 3 weeks, I'll be taking an exam where for an hour, the experts can ask me any question they want about my field of interest. So it's a rigorous process. I'm wondering, so I really want to know that they're going to make it through. I want to know that they know what a physician scientist does. You're kind of like a jack of all trades, but a master of none, right? So you have your clinical side, you have your research side, but you'll never be as good at research as you will be as a full-time PhD. You just don't have the time. And you'll never be as good in the clinics as your full-time clinical people, but you'll be good enough in both to excel. And I want to know that they understand that component. Not that I don't want you to write exactly that, right? Like don't say, oh, I understand that I won't be able to balance, but show them that you've talked to enough MD PhDs or you've shadowed MD PhDs and you really understand the nuances and you've seen what it's like for them to run a lab, right? And show the excitement that you have. So that's where the sprinkling that I put in about, oh, I voluntarily wrote grants to get funding for my organization, right? Again, it kind of shows us that you're committed to that aspect and that you're good at it and you can do it. I show acumen in writing in any aspects that I can. So again, show them that you understand how this goes and that you can, you'll excel. And the last part is, I think the teaching and mentoring aspects are always a perk. If you like teaching and mentoring, a big aspect of academic medicine and academic science is teaching and mentoring. So I highly encourage if you can and if you like it. So don't do anything you don't like, but if you like it, get some experience teaching and mentoring in your undergraduate time and kind of talk about those experiences too. Show us that you are going to, in fact, train the next generation of physicists and scientists in the academic world. Because a lot of MD PhDs go on to become deans and directors of MSTP programs and take on leadership roles. So we want to see that part. And then in everything else for the rest of your application, we really want to see the integrity and maturity part. So talk about your volunteering experiences. Talk about how aware you are of social issues, of socioeconomic things that affect medicine, and really be able to convey why you want to be a doctor. So in writing about the research, if going back and looking at my AMCAS application, I think I really sold them on the engineering, innovation, and research side. But in hindsight, I wish I'd written more about how much I love seeing patients and the aspect of how much I love working with people. So make sure that you don't compromise on that aspect of your application. And then that's the same thing in the right. So the experience in caring for others, write about your patient experiences, why a patient resonated with you. And what does that tell you about what type of doctor you want to be, right? So if you see a really empathetic doctor and they were able to do something, talk about why you are going to be the same way. So I would make sure that you really sell them on those aspects, while also showing them that you're a good researcher. So don't compromise on these two. So here are a couple of snippets that I thought I would kind of show you from my personal statements that I'd probably keep if I had to rewrite them. And then I tell you, and the aspects that I'd maybe add is is maybe a little bit more about patients that I've seen. So that's the one change that I would make. I'd probably talk a little bit more about the clinical stories. But here I'm basically talking about how I'm going to bring engineering to my medical training. So I explicitly state, I want to combine my engineering with my medical training to not only treat patients, but bridge innovators and patients. So I'm saying I'm not only going to be a bridge between researchers and doctors, that I'm really going to be at the forefront of the technology that influences medicine. I give an example of something that I've accomplished in this field, and then I say, and then I kind of summarize at the end how my skills are going to help. So I'm saying I will be able to leverage on these skills and experiences to bring technological advances to my patients. So I'm directly telling them. So it's again that show, not tell part. I give them an example of something that I've meaningfully done to improve technology in a place where there was no such technology, right? I'm saying I actively brought something that wasn't there, and I will do this as a medical student or as a doctor. So kind of, again, selling them on your passion and your uniqueness in medicine. And then the top part is where I kind of started talking about a patient. And this is how I chose to integrate my community aspect, my community outreach aspect. You can do it any way you want, but I start talking about a patient. And you'll see this a lot, unfortunately, in medicine, but a patient that came in with a heart, they were admitted for a heart attack, but basically this patient was having all types of issues because they have an incredibly unhealthy lifestyle and they're overweight, and they're not able to do much about that. And then I talk about, and then I show the empathy side of my, of how I see more than just the fact that they had a heart attack and they're unhealthy and they have a high BMI. And then I talk about saying, I learned about how they're a single mother and they're working 3 jobs and how that made them feel. And then the rest of the sentence, I'm basically talking about how I did a lot of work with United Way, which is a local nonprofit organization here. Well, they're a national nonprofit organization, but they have local events everywhere. And I talk about how I started working with this nonprofit interested in the education side of things, that then it also makes you aware of the social conditions that influence how a person is, why someone is a certain way, and how as a doctor, I'm always going to think of my patients, not just, oh, high BMI, send them to a nutritionist, do this, get out. But I'm going to think about why are they feeling this way? What can I do to make sure that their health truly improves and that they leave here feeling empowered to make life decisions, not just feeling shitty about things they can't change. So this is how I kind of chose to talk about a patient experience and integrate a little bit about things that I've already done with volunteering and how as a doctor I can do more based on my background. But you can do this 100 different ways. You can really, you could really just dive deep into a patient conversation you've had. In some way, you want to, in your personal statement, show them that patient care, that you understand what patient care is, and that you have empathy for that person. So again, you don't want to say, I'm an empathetic person. You want to convey that somehow in your personal statement. And then, so for the why MD-PhD part, I am showing you here a couple snippets of things that I thought were important to include. So there's 2 things that you really want to get across in your why MD-PhD essay. And I'd say this is one of the most important essays you could write for the MD-PhD admissions committee, because this is a short one. It's easy for us to read. And then we look at it and say, great, they really want to do it. Or we look at it and say, great, they really don't know what MD-PhD is next, right? So you really want to sell them in this component. So the first paragraph is I'm telling them that I've had a lot of different research experiences. And this is a creative way of saying, I didn't know what I was doing, so I did a bunch of things. But from those things, I realized that I like answering questions with clear clinical relevance and application. And I enjoy approaching research from a blend of basic and translational methodologies so that I can bring what I learned directly to clinics. So I'm telling them that, hey, I'm aware that I did a whole hodgepodge of things, but here's what I learned from those things. So I'm showing them that I like clinical and translational research without saying that exactly. So I'm again showing them my acumen for why I should go into MD-PhD. And then the second part, I talk about what I've noticed in the physician scientists I've worked with. Do you have to do that? Absolutely not. That's just how I chose to convey to them that I have seen physician scientists work within labs, serve as bridges between clinics and, and a lab. And I've seen them do this, and I want to do the same. So the rest of the application is basically me integrating these two things, talking about my strengths and why I'll be a good MD-PhD. But I think paragraphs like these are really important to put in there to say, from my experiences, the conclusion I came to was I love doing research that helps medicine. And then from my experiences, I really learned what a physician scientist career and life looks like, and I can see myself doing that. So if you can convey those two things in your essay, you'll be solid. Like that's what you really want to get across. And then this is one of, the why MD-PhD essay gets people excited about who you are, right? And then this is, I think, would be the component that really makes or breaks the are you going to get an interview part. Because the significant research experiences essay is 10,000 words. It's a really, really long essay where you get to tell us, here's what I've done in the past. Here's why I'm already good enough to be an independent researcher. Because the minute you step away from undergrad and you step into medical school, they'll say, great, here's a project, start designing your own experiments. It's like night and day, but they want to know that you're ready to take that step. So I'm going to show you two examples. I'll talk about what you should include in this. One is, I'll start out with a bad example, and I'm hoping you guys can tell me why it's bad, and then we'll read a good example. So the main things that you want to convey in this. So when you're done reading a significant research experience essay, you want to say, what did that person study? Did they have a hypothesis? So, did you say, here's the background on what's known in the field. Here was my educated hypothesis based on what's already known. And here's how I already studied it, or I'm continuing to study it or approaching it now. And then you want to talk about your role in the project. It's okay to say, in my first lab, I helped run experiments for my grad students. But that experience taught me key techniques and how to do those. And I learned how the grad students were thinking. And then next year, I took on more intellectual roles. So main thing we want to know is that not that you can run a Western blot, it's that you can say, I have a question. I think this drug is going to influence this particular protein. How will I design that experiment? What positive controls do you need? What negative controls do you need? If something goes wrong in the experiment, can you think about how a protein assay works and troubleshoot that? So part of what we care about is that you can convey to us that one of your roles in the research experience overall was thinking critically about what's going on, and that you'd be able to troubleshoot your own experiments, because that's one of the main things you'll have to do as a grad student. So again, we're gauging whether you're ready to be a grad student. And then the third part is probably the most important. What did you learn, either from the successes or the challenges that you persevered? How did you overcome challenges? How did you overcome times when maybe your hypothesis was wrong? How did you change your thinking? How did you design experiments? And then main thing is, what did it tell you about your career path? Kind of like this paragraph where I'm saying these experiences made me realize this is what I like about science. You want to say, let's say you did protein work. You can say, I really enjoyed learning about molecular signaling and how protein interactions influence how different signaling pathways go in our body. In my future as a physician scientist, I hope I can take this understanding and work on drug development projects or other translational work that can directly move research into clinical world. So you're not saying, so it's a very nice way of saying, great, loved working with proteins, won't be doing that anymore. But it shows us great maturity that you thought about it. And we're able to say, here are the skills that I gained from something that I don't want to do anymore, but here's how I'm going to be really good at what I want to do because of the experiences I've had. So again, you want to convey that maturity component in this component of your essay. So this is my fun part. So here, I want to give you all a minute to read this. And then I'm going to mute myself. I want you guys to raise your hand and tell me why this is a bad example. So while you guys think about what's wrong with this statement, Raghavi, that's a great question. I personally did not talk about my international background. That being said, when I apply for residencies, will I talk about it? Yes, because I've done work in F1 doctors and I have publications to back up the fact that I'm doing my best to try and help students like me. And so I have a way of conveying the fact that I'm international as a strength. So I personally would not write about it unless either one, it was a major difficulty for some reason, right? Being international itself, we understand the difficulty, but I would not expect the admissions committee to understand that. Not everyone is aware of it. That's part of why F1 doctors exist. So I would not personally just write, oh, I'm an international student, and so I've had to overcome challenges. Unless you're willing to tell them exactly what challenges they were and why they were so challenging. But the one caveat there is you never want to play victim either. So when you're writing a personal statement, you want to balance being vulnerable with also showing off your strengths. This is a professional environment. So you really want to walk a thin line. You also don't want to aggressively take a political stance. So, now when I write about my work with international students, I talk about creating a global network of doctors, creating a global network of researchers, and how my unique experience as someone who is an international student helps me kind of achieve that. I don't ever talk about it in my applications as a negative thing. I talk about how as an international student, I uniquely understand what it's like to be one, and I'm doing my best to help everyone else who's also in that boat feel integrated into our community and how I've helped do that. So if you can write that eloquently, I would say yes. But if there's any way that statement is going to sound political, I would not even touch it, because the last thing you want is to irk a really, really one-sided politically thinking person and have them put away our application because of what you wrote. Does that kind of make sense? All right. Anyone have any thoughts on why this is a bad statement? Don't all speak at once. So I'll get started with yes, Kevin.
I guess I'll just give a little bit like my 2 cents. So I think this person mentioned a lot of like technical details, like Image Studio, Image J, not Image Studio, R Studio, whatever those are. Maybe not really important. I think the science part and how this person actually, I think there should be more like description about the background of the project, like how this person approached this project and etc. and stuff, like just describing really like this kind of blend, like how he or she, did all this stuff. It's just super technical, but like not scientific, not like as interesting as it would be.
Absolutely. I agree. To reiterate what Kevin said, this has no background information on it. I have no idea why this person's studying what they're studying, what's known about the field. What are ganglion cells, right? So like as someone reading this, I have no clue why they're doing this project. So absolutely, that's an important part. And two, the technical stuff is cool, but why was that methodology selected? I think that's more interesting than the actual technical stuff. Raghavi.
This person also did what you said not to do. They were telling a lot and not really showing why and what.
Exactly. I agree. You're absolutely right. Any other comments on this? Okay. And I think the main other thing that's missing is, I just say at the end, beyond impressed with my first exposure to medical research. That's all this person says, right? So, what did they learn from it? What about the research did they like? So a more eloquent way of saying it is, through this experience, I learned how to apply my engineering skills to answer medically related projects or medically important questions, right? So, and or something along those lines where you can tie what you learned and what you did to realistic conclusions about how it's going to, what it taught you, and then what you're going to do in the future. And you can say something like, this taught me how to apply my engineering skills to solve clinically relevant problems, and also how to integrate the use of more translational approaches, such as using animal models. So here we're using feline models, right? So you really want to summarize and how you can use that to back up some of the modeling questions that they answer. So you really want to summarize what exact skills and learnings you got, and then you can say, either this experience made you want to do more, or, I found from this that I really like the medical component of it, but not so much the coding component of it. And so I switched labs. So you really want to summarize what was learned. And I think that's one of the main things that is really missing from the statement. Now, I want to urge you to take a minute to read this statement. So this is also a person describing their first ever research experience, and take a minute to read that. Actually, instead of awkwardly waiting, I might just read it to you, and I'll highlight. Sai, that's absolutely. So that's one of those areas where I think you could talk about it, but then when I read that, I would say you could shadow. Our international status does not prevent shadowing. So I think maybe the main caveat there, or the obstacle there, was COVID, not the fact that you were international. So the reason I'm saying that also is I'd like to think we're taught just as at the same as non-international people, but you don't want to even accidentally bias the person that's reading your application. By the odd chance that they have some really one-sided political views, you don't want that to be the reason you don't get a position. So when we look at AMCAS applications, we actually skip over the entire first part because someone's already screened through the grades and stuff. And as interviewers, our main job is to read the personal statement, the experiences, and then come up with good questions for you. So chances are a lot of people might not even know you're international by the time they're interviewing you. And if the schools are willing to offer you an interview, then the school doesn't have a problem. So the school's cool with it. The interviewer probably didn't even notice, and they really like you for all the other reasons. There's no reason for them to know you're international or not. But for your situation, I would maybe talk about how COVID-19 pandemic and how COVID-19 in general limited how much volunteering you could do. And so that drastically decreased your clinical hours. But then you can say, but in the meantime, I stayed involved in this, and this, and that's how I impacted the community, or that's what I did with my time. So you can always frame it as a way of saying, I couldn't be in clinics, but here's what I did instead. Hopefully that was helpful. Okay. So this essay, and I put a link down here, it's actually from a student at Washington University. I highly encourage you to look up that link. And actually, at the end, I'll put that link, another really helpful link in the chat for you all to look at too. One sec, let me just do that. Yeah. So this entire So I just wanted to put that link in there for anyone. Now I don't know how to share my screen. Okay, I wanted to put that link in there for anyone that wants to look at the entire statement. I thought it was one of the most well-written statements that I've read in a while. Did I just message it to you, Kevin?
Yeah, you said it to me. It's okay. I said it to you.
I was like, I don't know what I did. But the main takeaway from this, they're saying, it's written in a very easy to read language, but also shows complex writing skills. So they're not saying, I began my research as a freshman. I worked in this lab. So there's complex sentence structure showing that they're a good writer, but it's also very easy to follow. So that it shows, when I read this, I can say, man, this person's a good writer. That's something I care about as an MD-PhD. So that's the first thing that pops out to me.
So
the next thing.
Your screen is not showing the correct slide again, I think.
It keeps doing this. I don't know why. Thank you.
We were kind of stuck.
How about now?
Yeah, now it's good.
Okay, perfect. So this person says, I first began my research as a freshman in this lab, and I'm investigating the mechanisms of ubiquitin pathway in yeast cells. So that's like a quick summary of what it is. And then they go on to explain what the research in their lab is. So they're saying it focused on ubiquitin. This is what ubiquitin is. Just because someone's a doctor, don't assume they know these processes, right? Like I learned about ubiquitin first year of medical school, and I promise you, unless you do research in the field as a medical professional, you'll never come across it again. So do your reviewers a favor and explain your research. We're all very, very specialized in what we do. So explain to them what your research is and have one sentence on the background for your research needed to understand. And then they honestly say, for my first year in this lab, I primarily assisted with research projects of graduate students and with various tasks in the lab. So I looked at this interaction, I looked at this, I looked at this, and that's okay. What's not okay is if she had written, oh, for my first year, I basically washed glassware and helped with ordering in the lab. That's not, unfortunately, a significant research experience. So you want to seek out research experiences where you can contribute. It doesn't have to be your own project the first time, right? You can contribute to other people's projects, but you want to be running experiments. You want to be giving presentations. You want to be involved in the research productivity somehow, because unfortunately, we do draw a strict line on saying if you were a research technician who did, I did ordering for the lab, and then I cleaned glassware and I maintained all the reagents, it's not you actively contributing to a project. So we don't count that as an official significant research experience. So I'd be careful about what research positions you take on in your time as well. And then they go on to say they wanted to be more independent. But in the meantime, in the time that they were working with other students, they gained all of these technical skills. So I look at this and say, man, they could come to MCW, so our program, and directly get running on a project because they know how to do a lot of these. So if they want to continue doing this, they're technically adept. And then the rest of it, they go on to talk about their individual projects and how they built from there. So I think it's very eloquently written where they're talking about from the start, where they started to how much they grew as a researcher. And then in the bottom part, they're also summarizing by they gained understanding of the background, the purpose, and the significance of the research that they're doing, and they wanted to do more with it as well. So it's a great first paragraph that talks about how they started, which is so much more eloquent in conveying almost the same story that this essay. Why won't it move? This essay was trying to convey, right? This essay was also trying to convey, here was my first exposure to research. I really liked it, so I went on to do more. And this person saying the same thing. Here was my first exposure to research. I basically just did some techniques. Here's how I went on to do more. So it's about how you convey your story and really show them your writing quality here. And this is another great opportunity for you to reach out to mentors, even within your institutions, that are really, really good writers, and have them tease this apart. Read this and say, if you read your essay and you read this essay, do they read comparably from a writing standpoint? Because writing is an incredibly important and useful skill in MD-PhD. So have mentors help you with writing as well and make it a polished statement. So with that, I would love to open it up to questions, and I included 2 links in there, both of which are in the chat. The first one I think has some really great personal statement, like just do's and don'ts. And it's kind of funnily written and sometimes harsh, but it's very important. And I think those are very important do's and don'ts. And the research essay, again, it's one of my favorite essays. And this is the type of essay that gets people an instant yes for an interview when we look at applications. And my email's out there, so if you don't want to ask questions now, please feel free to email me. Just know that if I don't respond in like a week, please email me again, because your email got lost somewhere, and it's no offense to you. We just get bombarded with a lot of emails, and I have a qualifying exam coming up. So please don't be offended. Please double email me, and I will make sure to get back to you. I see something in the chat. Other than applying early, what's something you recommend we do as applicants this year? Practice for interviews. So here's another, if only I knew then what I know now kind of situations. I've always loved talking to people, right? As an extrovert, sometimes you can feel very confident about an interview situation and say, oh yeah, totally fine. I can go explain things to people. But you want your answers to be short and eloquent, and you don't want to sound too prepared, but you also want to have put thought into what you're saying. And the only way that happens is if you put the time it takes to practice for interviews. So, as many professors as you can get, practice for an interview. Get used to explaining your research to people. Get used to questions like, tell me about a patient that had a difficult time. What did you do? And honestly, there's so many questions that people could ask. Feel free to send them your AMCAS and say, can you please mock interview me? And you can ask friends. You can ask your mentors on F1 doctors to do a mock interview for you. But really, really practice speaking about anything and everything from your application. I'm trying to think, is there anything else that you should do? I would also get your research experiences essay ultra polished before you submit it. So yes, it's important to submit early, but as long as you submit within the month of June, it's okay. So if June 1st, your essay is going to look kind of choppy, but by June 20th, you're going to have the best research experience essay ever, submit on June 20th, because quality plays a huge role when it comes to who we can interview for MD-PhD as well. So especially because the other important distinction in MD-PhD is an MSTP program versus a MD-PhD program. So there's about 40 programs in the country that have the MSTP designation. That means that they have NIH funding, and normally those are looked upon as the best programs. So those 40 are kind of your top ranked MD-PhD programs. And then there's a bunch of other programs that offer MD-PhD training, but they might not give you the same level of funding. So there's some programs where they'll cover tuition for all years, but you have to take care of your own living expenses. So those MD-PhD programs do not have to operate like a MSTP program. So make sure you look into the details of those programs if you are interested in a non-MSTP program. So that's another important distinction as you're looking there too. Yeah, so actually that's another lesson I learned after the fact, where I had a lot of different research experiences in undergrad, and I gave equal weight to try and explain all of them within those 10,000 words. And if I had to do it again, I think what I would say is my most significant research experience was this, and really talk about how much work I had done in that lab. And then all for the other ones, I probably would have just said at the end saying, I'm incredibly grateful for this opportunity. And the other thing is you could say, I've also had some smaller projects that I worked on in these labs. Of those, my most influential engineering project was this. And as a physician scientist, I want to combine this and this. I probably would have picked like 2, maybe 3, rather than like trying to fit 5 projects in 10,000 words. So I probably would have, if I had to do it again, I would have stuck with quality over quantity. And then the rest can go in your experiences. Will you plan to own an independent lab in the future? Yeah, as an applicant, if someone says, I don't want to run my own lab, you're probably going to get auto rejected. I hate that that's kind of the sentiment in most programs, that it generally is, because that's what our training is for. That being said, I think it's only like only a small proportion of MD-PhDs actually go on to do the 80-20. A good chunk of them do the 50-50. Another portion of them do 70% clinical, 30% research, and then some just don't do research at all. So the reality is not everyone goes out to be the 80% research and 20% clinical people. But I think normally programs like to see that those were due to circumstances during MD-PhD training or residency rather than your vision coming in. 50-50, is that so bad? Not at all. That's probably what a lot of people end up doing anyway. But I probably wouldn't tell a program director that. Any other lingering thoughts, comments, questions?
You mentioned that writing is very important, right, Gopika?
Mhm.
So so what if you have like what I mean is like you have like publications that you're co-author of,
Mhm.
but you did not contribute at all to the writing of the manuscript because your PI and like the grad student was much more involved, but you
Yeah.
did some writing of your own, but it's not like a publication level and it was like a poster or like a presentation by yourself. Does that
Oh,
change anything?
oh, that doesn't matter at all. The fact that your
Okay.
name got on the publication is fine. So it'll still give you like a brownie point. And then we can gauge, because a lot of times undergrads don't get the experience of writing significantly, right? Like your situation is what's most common. I'm talking about writing from the standpoint of um, your application. So when we read the significant research experiences, we can gauge your writing skills from that. So that's where I'm saying we can tell how good you are at talking about research from
Mhm.
that from the application. So that's where I wanted to highlight the writing part. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Do you have any tips of keeping your anxiety and nerve under control during the application interview? I couldn't tell you. It's something that we all continue to struggle with. It's something that um, I think the medical profession in general tends to attract very type A people who want to be on top of things and in control. And intrinsically, the application and the interview and the entire process is very much out of your control. There's some things in your control, obviously, but a lot of it is just sheer luck, unfortunately, and who reads your application and how much coffee they had that morning. Um, the best thing I can say is do the things that keep you healthy. So whether that's exercise, meditation, eating healthy, seeing family, seeing friends, do everything it takes that makes you happy and wholesome as a person. Um, and then at some point you have to just accept to yourself that this is just the beginning of the path. MD PhD especially is a huge marathon, not a sprint. If you get freaked out about every next milestone that comes along, you'll forever just be a ball of cortisol. And that's, you just can't live like that. So I think at some point you just have to accept and know and trust in yourself that you'll be okay. And if things are not okay, you'll learn how to be okay and that you'll persevere and move forward. And that this is just one step in a long line of steps in your career and it'll be okay. I had a lot of my education outside the US. Majority of my experience come from outside. Um, oh yes, absolutely. You can always include experiences that are not outside, that are outside of the US. Learn how to be okay. Yeah, I wish I had better advice from you, but that's literally it. But yeah, you can always talk about your experiences outside the country. Only thing you want to be careful of, let's say there's a little bit of worry that students from America go, like an undergrad level student here will not be allowed to do much in the clinics, right? Like they can't even check blood pressure unless they're like directly being taught and supervised. But then you go to like, oh, I went to this third world country and I was giving people injections and doing this and doing that and doing a full physical exam on my own kind of gets iffy because there's a component where global health is really important. But if we're going to contribute to global health, we have to contribute quality care that we would accept in our country and only provide that for those outside. So if your experiences outside somehow smear that line in any way, I would be careful about how you write that. But other than that, absolutely, your experiences from all around the world count. How do you think I should approach questions about why I want to leave a PhD and start an MD? I think be honest. I mean, only you can answer that. Why do you want to leave a PhD and go into an MD PhD? You want to tell me and I can tell you if I'm convinced? You can unmute and talk, by the way. Might be easier.
Hi, Gopika. Thanks
I
for
do.
sharing your experience this evening. So, I'm from Nigeria, and I think I should just show my face right now. Okay, cool. So, I'm in my first year of PhD, and I actually had a few experiences in life that have shaped my decision to apply for the MD-PhD program. And before coming to the United States, I bagged a master's degree in biochemistry, where my focus was on purification of drugs, especially drugs that are important in modulating cell death via the mitochondrial pathway of death. So I was focusing on, I don't know if you've read about permeability transition for mitochondria before. So we can actually apply those compounds in like tumor cells or cells that are aberrant, refusing to die. So I think I have this passion of also of not just identifying or purifying drugs. I have this passion of understanding correct dosage and drug interactions and why or how we should administer drugs to patients, especially when it comes to the oncological aspect, like this toxicology, oncology kind of mix. So I think also I have some experience working as medical sales representative where I had to detail doctors about some molecules and tell them, you know, I don't know if you've met sales representatives before from pharmaceutical companies that sort of come to present some new compounds and say that, oh, this is the dosage and these are the food drug or drug interactions, and you should use it for these patients, not for these patients. So I have that sort of experience, and I intend to, for the PhD part, purify new compounds as well that specialize or work on cell death, modulate cell death, and also apply these things clinically, and especially in patients that have some kind of solid tumor, solid tumors, I mean, that are actually suffering. I just want to apply these things from real life in the clinic. I just try to model everything up anyway.
No,
So-
no, that was good. That was good. Can you tell me why you maybe can't do that as a pharmacologist or as a, I mean, PhDs can do clinical research. Why do you feel like you have to be a doctor to kind of carry out that goal of yours?
Okay, number one, to be honest, the understanding of the human body as a PhD student, or what you would learn about the human body as a PhD student, is highly limited. I have taken some neuroanatomy courses, but they still don't dig deep enough.
Yeah.
And I'm still not getting enough of what I actually need to be able to appreciate how drugs work clinically. I based on the research I did on drug compound purification, I did not get to go so far into organ drug interaction and know what's actually happening. These are some of the limitations that MD-PhD bridges. So being in an MD program would help me appreciate intricate details about organ systems and look at how I can apply compounds at the molecular level. I mean, how to solve problems. And I think this is one of the things being in an MD-PhD program would do for me.
Yeah, I think that's a great answer. And I would say that's a good start to your answer, though. I think the part that's maybe missing, and this is actually a good learning experience for everyone too, is one of the things that we really want to know is kind of what you said, David, that your passion for learning more about the human body and that you want to understand the whole human system, right? So that's a really important component. But the second part is you want to say somehow, I have been involved in clinical care, or I have seen clinical care, I have seen doctors, I've shadowed, I've volunteered, and in here, these patients really resonated with me, and I can see myself doing that also. So somehow you want to show them that you don't want to just spend the rest of your life working in a lab and creating compounds, but you want to create compounds and actively go see patients, listen to their hearts, right? An electronic note, and do all the more nuanced kind of cookie cutter things a doctor would do, right? So I think the part that's maybe missing is sell us on the fact that you know what it's like being in clinics, you've seen medicine, you've shadowed clinical medicine, and you want to do that part also. So somehow convey to us that you're not happy just developing these products, but you want to run the clinical trials. You want to be the clinician that manages the side effects from that clinical trials and learns from that clinically. So somehow show you, I think the part that's missing is really telling us why you have to be a doctor and not just, and the other component is we always ask people, why do you need to be a doctor? Could you accomplish your goals as a nurse, as a physician assistant? Like, what is motivating you to be a physician specifically, right? Because we do take a longer path. We want people to finish medical school and go to residency, finish residency, and then go into being a doctor. So kind of sell us on that part too. So I would think about that, but I think you have a great starting point to telling us why you want to go into medicine.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah, I hope that was helpful. But it's very cool to hear about the research you're doing, though. I started out in cancer research, so it's very interesting work. Yeah.
Well, right now, I'm doing some rotation in pharmacology as well. So I'm in a lab that focuses on drug delivery right now using cationic lipid particles, lipid nanoparticles rather.
Oh, that's super neat.
Although it's my first time working on nanoparticles, but
They're like
I'm
they're
excited.
the cutting edge. You're the cutting edge of science, so it's good.
So thanks for your advice.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering if they would, I mean, it's really weird. I've spoken to a few people about it and they feel like, well, you would have to explain a lot of things and tell them why you want to leave. I mean, they would ask you, why did you want to leave this? Okay, if I'm not applying, I'm in a medical university right now in New York. If I'm not applying to this university, if I was applying to another university, they would probably be asking me these and the questions. Why did you want to leave your program? Do you want to waste those years or those months you spent and come and start another lengthy journey here?
Yeah. I mean, especially if you want to do an MD-PhD, a commonly asked question would be, why don't you just finish your PhD and then apply MD? And you do have to figure an answer to that, right? Because you're already almost halfway through. You said 2 years?
No, first year right now.
Your first year. Okay.
Yeah.
So you're like a fifth through an MD-PhD program or PhD program. So one of the things that you do need to have an answer for, and you can be honest, you can say, I mean, the real answer is, why would you finish a PhD and then pay for med school if you're going to do both anyway, right? And I would reach out to your local MD-PhD program director. Is there an MD-PhD program at your institution?
Yeah.
I would reach out and talk to them. And the first thing you could probably ask is, can I transfer into your MD-PhD program? That's probably the lowest hanging fruit and the easiest to do. And a lot of times they might be okay with that and help you apply internally. So I would start there. And honestly, it's a good question to ask them. How do I best convey this? Because I mean, it's a good point. If you're going to do both anyway, there's no reason you should be paying for medical school, right?
Yeah.
So I just honestly don't know how an admissions person would think that. I personally, if you were interviewing with me and you said that, I'd be like, yeah, makes sense. But I'm also me, right? I understand it. I don't know if everyone would feel that way. I've never had to think about that. So I would ask your program director in a nice way. If they say you can't join their MD-PhD program or whatever, and you have to go elsewhere anyway, then ask them that question. Okay, fine. Like, how do I tell them?
Oh,
yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Well, I do have to run, but my email's there. Thank you again for the opportunity to come talk to everyone. It was nice to actually be able to answer questions and hear from some of you. If you need anything at all, please email. And a huge shout out to Kevin for putting all of this together. Doing great.
All right.
Thanks, Gopika.
Yeah. Bye, everyone.